Jonny Gould's Jewish State.
The Wolf of Baghdad, a memoir of a lost homeland.
It's about this feeling of nostalgia for a place that you've never been to, that you've never lived in, like a homesickness. The Finns have a wonderful word, kaipu. It means a longing for a homeland that you never knew existed, that you don't know, that you've never been to, but you've just been told about. And that's how I feel as a first generation. I was born in this country, but my family are from Iraq.
Carol Isaacs, author, cartoonist, accordionist, keyboard player, now historian.
It's a book, it's a motion comic, and it's also a live event because we perform it. The band, like you imagine a silent movie, you have the animation running on screen, and then you have the band in the pit playing the music to go along with it. So it's like a live event. So it's a three-pronged attack, as it were.
She fuses her entire musical and graphic gifts to tell us her family's history.
This was the first time I'd ever done anything long form. Previously, I've done single panel gags, you know, the gag you see in papers and magazines. And to do a book, I thought, I don't know what made me do it. It just occurred to me. Maybe I thought it was the right time. I don't know. But as soon as I started, I thought, this is something I really want to do. And while I was drawing it, I was thinking, I wonder if there's a way that I can bring my musical professional life into this as well. And because I was drawing it digitally, as opposed to with pen and paper, it gave me more flexibility. I could turn it into a kind of an animation, something called a motion comic, actually, which is a mixture of of a book that you kind of look at on screen, where the panels come to life sort of one by one, and the story slowly unfolds itself. And because there was no dialogue, I thought, well, perhaps I could do a soundtrack to it. And so that was the idea of how the animation came to be.
And this is both a vivid and vital recollection of a culture stretching back 3,000 years in Babylon, now modern-day Iraq, Babylon, before Christianity and Islam.
I'm immensely proud of being a Babylonian Jew. My heritage runs deep, and I'm proud of where my people came from and what they achieved. And I look at my parents and how they left everything. You know, my family, they had to literally leave everything and just be removed, be transplanted somewhere else. And God bless them. I mean, both my parents, they looked forward, they didn't look back. I mean, that's part of it as well. They didn't want to talk about it. And they talked a little bit about the good stuff, but they never spoke about the bad experiences that they had. And it was only through my going back and interviewing my family for this book, my family so generously gave me their time and their stories, and they delved deep and they told me stuff that I never knew. I was shocked by quite a lot of it.
There are just 3 Jews left in Baghdad today. There were 140,000 in the 1940s. A third of Baghdad's population was Jewish. They were expelled, and the lightning speed of that is a lesson to us all.
Carol, what happened to the graves of your ancestors?
Some were demolished as Saddam made a highway. Cemeteries were removed, houses were... I think there are still some old houses in the old Jewish quarter that are still standing. They're very kind of old and crumbly. In fact, while I was doing the research for the book, I wanted to get the backgrounds right, and I couldn't find very many photos on the internet of old Baghdad. And through my blog and through Facebook, I had these young Iraqi students from Baghdad getting in touch with me saying, oh, who are you? What are you doing? And I told them, would you mind helping me? Just go into the old Jewish quarter and take some photos for me. I want to see what the houses look like now. And bless them, they did. And I was able to kind of recreate the Baghdad that my family would have remembered from their pictures, which was amazing.
Jonny Gould's Jewish State is brought to you with Dangoor Education.
Carol Isaacs, a warm welcome to Jonny Gould's Jewish State.
Hi, Jonny. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Congratulations to you on an immersive work which really touches on every emotion. The Wolf of Baghdad, a memoir of a lost homeland, to quote the full title, explains to a larger extent your motivation in creating this remarkable work. What story are you telling us?
Basically, it's the story of my family as told to me. I'm relaying their anecdotes, their memories of their lives in Baghdad. And it's kind of turned into this thing where it's telling the story of the Iraqi Jewish community of the time as well, because most of us had the same, most of them had the same experiences.
Now, I say it's a remarkable work because it's a body of work. It's not just written, but it's also multimedia as well. So you engage so many more people. Not everyone reads, but there's a whole other community of people who are visual.
Exactly. It's a book. It's mostly without words. There's no dialogue in it. Interspersed between the pages are memories of my family, like little snippets of anecdotes that I collected that inform the storyline. But the basic book itself is just wordless. It's just imagery.
And of course, it's a recollection from your family, a beautiful animation where you ask the salient question, can we live in the present here in England and be haunted by the destruction of one's family past?
Exactly. And it's about this feeling of nostalgia also for a place that you've never been to, that you've never lived in, like a homesickness. The Finns have a wonderful word, kauku kaipu, which means basically that. I think we have the same in Welsh, hirath or something. It means a longing for a homeland that you never knew existed, that you don't know, that you've never been to, but you've just been told about. And that's how I feel as a first generation. I was born in this country, but my family are from Iraq. And I find that with a lot of people here whose parents came from elsewhere, they have the same kind of feeling of nostalgia for that place that they've never visited, that they've just been told about.
The remarkable thing is that there is, within the Arab world, a new dialogue going on among the indigenous population, which is also viewing their life with Jewish neighbours as something that they long for, that's long gone, and they even believe, some of them, that they might come back one day. Bad luck.
I know. I've had a lot of, since this book was published and the animation and everything, I've had so much discussion. The bridges have opened between myself and Iraqis of all communities about who we are, why aren't the Jews here now? They've heard about Jews from their parents or their grandparents, that they used to live next door, that they were neighbors, that we traded together, we worked together, we socialized together, but where have they all gone? And through my book, it seems like they're connecting the dots somehow. And it's like, oh, that's how you lived, and that's how we lived too. And it's like this wonderful friendships that are being formed. I'm finding it's really unexpected, I have to say.
And indeed, I have experienced it as well. Now, I am Ashkenazi, and I am second generation. My grandparents came here in 1939, believe it or not, even after Kristallnacht. But of course, such was the brutal expulsion and indeed murder of some of my family that even though my grandma, Oliver Sholem, really talked beautifully about Vienna, but she talked about it beautifully in the 20s, not so much later on, and she was still very loyal to the king, Kaiser Franz Josef. But the life that she built in Birmingham with my grandfather was one, I think, of patriotism and relief, actually, that they could build on a platform. So I don't quite have the warmth of Vienna, although I have had the fortune of going back to see where they lived, in some grace, actually, but 100 years ago, less so 85 years ago. You haven't had that opportunity, have you?
Not yet, although it's been offered to me a couple of times by the Iraqi embassy here, who came to the Wolf of Baghdad, and they said, you should come and if it wasn't for COVID and the security situation, I probably would have gone, although there's nothing to see there. I mean, there's no family home, there are no graves, but it would have been more of a statement of, I'm here, I'm to reconnect with people, to tell them our story, because it seems that they are interested. Some of them are very interested, as I said, from the reaching out that I've had since this book was published.
Carol, what happened to the graves of your ancestors?
Some were demolished as Saddam made a highway. Cemeteries were removed, houses were... I think there are still some old houses in the old Jewish quarter that are still standing. They're very kind of old and crumbly. In fact, while I was doing the research for the book, I wanted to get the backgrounds right, and I couldn't find very many photos on the internet of old Baghdad. And through my blog and through Facebook, I had these young Iraqi students from Baghdad getting in touch with me saying, "Oh, who are you? What are you doing?" And I told them, would you mind helping me just go into the old Jewish quarter and take some photos for me? I want to see what the houses look like now. And bless them, they did. And I was able to kind of recreate the Baghdad that my family would have remembered from their pictures, which was amazing.
That is absolutely beautiful. I must tell you that I have also experienced at first hand that longing from the indigenous population of Baghdad for the Jews. And I do this as a former member of the Aston Villa Supporters Trust. And I experienced some pretty nasty anti-Semitism from that group of fans, except for one remarkable guy who runs what he calls the Iraqi Lions football club, Lions being Aston Villa's nickname. And there's a group of Arab guys about my age living all over Mena. And he says something to me about, my father had a shop next door to a Jewish trader and we respect the Jewish people, and if it wasn't for our leadership, things might be different. He actually said those things to me. So for the first time ever, Aston Villa acted as a tabernacle of peace beyond the 90 minutes of 442. So, I have experienced this Ashkenazi boy of descending from Vienna and also Russia and the Ukraine and other places that don't always spring to mind for your summer holiday brochure. I've experienced it too, Carol. It's an awakening, and possibly something to do with the Abraham Accords, do you think?
I don't know. I really don't. Maybe it's to do with the Arab Spring, the kind of bit more freedom. Maybe people were able to look around the world a bit more freely from the Middle East and see and get more information. I don't know. Something is in the air. I do know that there is all this interest. In fact, I've had a couple of universities in Iraq ask for the book to be put on their English literature, on the syllabus for their English literature students, which is undergraduates, which is amazing to me. I mean, that was just blew me out the water, that there's that much interest in it.
It's happening, and we'll talk about the great Lynn Julius in just a moment, because she's responsible for a very large amount of this new narrative, which actually gave me a wonderful insight, a first insight, I'm ashamed to say actually, of the Iraqi Sephardi Mizrahi experience. We hear so much about the Holocaust, we hear less about the Sephardi Mizrahi suffering, which was pretty similar.
I think these countries have to acknowledge the truth, the historical truth, that they kicked out their Jews. You can't blame the Jews themselves for their own exodus. You have to take responsibility, as the Germans did. After the war, they said, "Mea culpa, we did it. We created this problem. We are the authors of this tragedy, and we apologize, and here's some compensation, and here's some recognition." And of course that would never ever be adequate, but it's a start. At least they have acknowledged responsibility, and this hasn't happened with the Arab countries. Never have we heard an Arab country actually, I'm talking about governments. No government has actually apologized for the mass exodus of their Jewish citizens. You do occasionally hear a brave individual saying, like it happened with an Iraqi TV presenter not so long ago, and he actually went public and said, "Oh, we apologize for what we've done." But you won't hear an Arab government. They're too busy either denying that it's happened, or blaming the Zionists for it, or blaming the Jews themselves, or saying that the Jews left of their own free will.
In a way, they called it the silent exodus when we left Iraq, because we just left quietly and without fuss, and just went and settled wherever we could and just started new lives there. We didn't lose people like if Hitler had his way, he would have had extermination camps all over the Middle East. That would have been for sure. But we didn't suffer like the Ashkenazi Jews did. Certainly, it wasn't that level. But certainly the loss of a 2,600-year-old homeland was huge, and all the culture and everything that went with it. And so much has come out of Babylonia for the Jewish world as well. I think people don't tend to maybe not remember that. And again, like this mass exodus, this almost 1 million Jews from Arab lands and Iran leaving their homes, or being forced out, ethnically cleansed. It's kind of really been brushed under the carpet, and it's kind of time to look at it more closely, I think, now.
What you said is very apposite. Colonel Richard Kemp reminded us that the military victory of El Alamein stopped the disaster of Jewish extermination in the Middle East. So the number 6 million could have easily been 7 million, 7.5 million. It just happened that the Allied victory of El Alamein stopped the disaster from spreading, although there were Nazi victims of the Mizrahim. We must say that.
That's true. And anti-Semitism coming from Germany in particular was responsible in part to the forced exodus of our people too. I mean, there was a toxic mix of that plus Arab nationalism that kind of led to the one particularly important happening, 1941, called the Farhud, which is Arabic word for pogrom. And it was really the beginning of the end for the Iraqi Jews. They saw that they weren't welcome in their own country anymore. It was like 2 days of rioting. I think Lynn's probably talked about this to you at length. 2 days of there was a vacuum, a military coup, and a power vacuum, and the mobs just went crazy and took it all out on the Jews. And they began to realize, that this is not, we're not for this country anymore. This is not our place.
1941, around the time of Shavuos, and again, right. Lynn did talk in detail with me, and it was something which has so many parallels with pogroms, which of course some of my family in the First World War fell victim to, probably for a similar reason as well. Now, a third of Baghdad's population in the 1940s was Jewish. I mean, what a number. But soon after, 140,000 Jewish people were expelled, even as early as the 1950s. And that lightning speed of expulsion is a lesson to us all here in the UK, in the United States, where we are seeing continued assaults on Jewish communities in a militarized country where everyone has the right to bear arms. It's scary. We are exporting Islamist terror from this country, which is a shock. Maybe not a shock, but perhaps a surprise that it's not being dealt with, quite frankly. But let's talk about this sudden expulsion. The idea, like you said, that the Farhud triggered amongst the Jewish community the sudden, shock after uncatalogued generations. I mean, you were there for 3,000 years. I mean, really.
Predating the Muslims, predating the Christians, from way back when. And Babylonians. It was a huge shock, and to have to leave. I mean, a lot of people didn't want to leave. This was their home. Often they said, we are Iraqi before we are Jewish. They were proud to be Iraqi citizens. They may not have been living in the best of circumstances. There was always they had called dhimmi status, which is that status of second-class citizens. But depending on who was ruling, they were mostly treated fairly well, depending on who was in charge at the time. But they were allowed to live. They were allowed to continue their religious practices. Now and again, they'd be, it would be difficult, but they were doing okay. They were doing well. They were even in the government at the time, early 1917, when the British came in. There were Jews in Parliament running Iraq. The Jews were responsible for a lot of cultural activities. Most of the musicians of the time were Jewish. A lot of the music that's, especially the Iraqi classical music, was written and collated by Jewish musicians. So the first printing press, I believe, was owned by a Jewish Iraqi. So there's a lot to unpick there. We're part of the social, the cultural, the institutional life of Iraq. We were for a lot of years.
And we'll talk about that everyday life existence, because it's also about the joyous, deep, 140,000 strong Jewish community of Baghdad, and the kind of everyday life of those people, kashrut and shachrit, mincha marif, and festivals and everything. And your narration sees you accompanied by a wolf, because you're as much an artist as a historian. How did the idea of a wolf come about, and what does the wolf represent in the story?
So the book essentially is a walk through Baghdad as seen through my family's memories, and it's a celebration of the everyday, as you say, just the everyday life, and also the terrible things that had happened. And when I was doing the research for this book, I found let me put it this way. When my mother passed away 10 years ago, I found a little amulet amongst her belongings. It was the shape of a tooth, and it looked like some kind of thing. I think it was something that she pinned to our crib. And I went to look in more detail as to what it was, and I found out it actually was a wolf's tooth. And then I found in a book called The History of the Jews of Baghdad, which was published in 1917 by David Sassoon, in a chapter on myths and superstitions, where he writes, the Jews of Baghdad are very superstitious. They believe that if you keep a wolf in your cellar, it would keep the jinns, the bad spirits away, and it would protect the children, it would stop them from dying, keep them in good health. So I kind of put two and two together, and it was like, okay, so this little amulet is pinned to the crib of a child to keep it safe. And it was corroborated when I traveled in Jordan. I did a hike in Jordan, and I met some Bedouin there. And we were talking around the fire, as you do at night. And they said, oh, yes, the wolf, we regard it in high regard. And we also use parts of the wolf in our folk medicine, and the men wear the tooth on a string around their neck when they go hunting, because they admire how the wolf, all the great, how a wolf is, and how brave and how strong it is. So it's an interesting thing that in the East, the wolf is regarded as something a protector. And in the West, we look at it something quite bad, quite a malign influence, like the big bad wolf. So I thought to accompany throughout my journey, I'd have this wolf as a protector. So that was the idea of calling it the Wolf of Baghdad.
These ideas of superstition are also highly visible in the Ashkenazi world. My grandma handed me a red ribbon when I passed my driving test to put in the dashboard, and I have a red ribbon from my grandma. Still, it's a bit old and it's a bit dusty, but it's still in the car, and thank God everything's been okay so far. So it's great to hear an almost identical parallel manifestation of superstition. Now, we are experiencing, aren't we, in the Spanish and Portuguese world, Catholics who insist that despite the fact that they were baptized, their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents were baptized, they were secret Jews, and we're Jewish, we are. My name's Juan Pablo, but I am a Jew, and I'm going to Israel, or I'm going to set up a shul, and this is happening in the European world. There must be hundreds, maybe thousands of Muslims still in Iraq who have lived, I don't know, Orthodox Muslim lives because you have to, but are probably Jewish despite the lack of practice or anything now for 2, 3, 4, 5 generations.
Absolutely, there's no doubt. I mean, we know for a fact from 140,000 in the 1940s, there are now, I believe, 3 official Jews left in Baghdad, in Iraq, 3. They don't want to leave. They are kind of hidden away somewhere, just waiting out their days. But I'm pretty sure that there's an awful lot more. If you did DNA test, if you went and delved further, you'd probably find a lot more. But I guess the situation there is not such that you want to admit that. However much interest there is from certain parts of the population, I don't think they're quite ready for that kind of admission.
Carol, why do you think the Mizrahi diaspora story isn't as widely known? It can't just be that the Holocaust was the biggest 20th century disaster that stopped other narratives of Jewish people around the world. Lynn explained it to me that Mizrahim quietly rebuilt their lives in Paris or Milan or Jerusalem or Los Angeles and didn't quite have the storytelling panache, shall we say, or expressions that perhaps the early Ashkenazim did in America, for example.
That's such a good question. And still to this day, you get people, they were Jews in Iraq, they were Jews in Iran. And some guy said, he swore blind, an Algerian guy, there were no Jews in Algeria. What are you talking about? Rubbish. So people still to this day don't believe that. Maybe the idea of the Jew as being European and white, a brown-skinned Middle Eastern indigenous person, it couldn't possibly be a Jew, could they? That kind of narrative. And it's time to set the narrative straight and tell our stories and be proud of them. I mean, it's, I'm immensely proud of being a Babylonian Jew. My heritage runs deep, and I'm proud of where my people came from and what they achieved. And I look at my parents and how they left everything. My family, they had to literally leave everything and just be removed, be transplanted somewhere else. And God bless them. I mean, both my parents, they looked forward. They didn't look back. I mean, that's part of it as well. They didn't want to talk about it. And they talked a little bit about the good stuff, but they never spoke about the bad experiences that they had. And it was only through my going back and interviewing my family for this book, my family so generously gave me their time and their stories, and they delved deep and they told me stuff that I never knew. I was shocked by quite a lot of it, what they told me, what they had been through. I never knew any of this. So it's just stories that need to come out, untold stories that people maybe thought, okay, that's enough. Our old life is gone. We are now here. Let's move forward. I mean, even as much as I grew up with Western music in the house, I never heard music of my heritage. And it's only in the last 10 years that I've begun to appreciate and learn music from Iraq. And originally it was through an Iraqi musician, Ahmed Mukhtar, an oud player from Baghdad, who helped me immensely in learning my own musical heritage. So it's there, but it just needs to be brought out somehow.
We'll talk about Ahmed Mukhtar in just a moment. There's something else about the mitzvah, I think, I'm going to call it, of you telling your story, and Lynn, and Chen Mazig, and people on our side as well, like, for example, Ben Freeman, who talks about Jewish pride, and he's like me, he's from the UK, of shtetl background, that it's a strike against the lies and propaganda told about Israel. The idea that Israel is a white colonial outpost, when, to put it crudely, there are more brown Jews than white Jews making up the population of the state of Israel. And that people like Mark Lamont Hill, a commentator who talks about Palestinian Jews being deliberately extracted from their Palestinian identity. What a load of rubbish.
It's interesting, isn't it? All my life I've had this. I went to a school, a very British school, 900 girls, 30 of whom were Jewish. I was the only Mizrahi Jew. Everyone assumed I spoke Yiddish. I ate bagels for breakfast, smoked salmon, oy vey, da-da-da. Fiddler on the Roof was my family musical. And it's very hard to say. It's like, no, there are other kinds of Jews here too, I've had this all my life. People are always surprised. And as I say, it's just about setting the record straight. We're just telling what happened to us. This is us. Make of it what you will. You have the information now. Set the record straight.
I must tell you that some of the Ashkenazi internalized oy veys and everything are actually not part of my family either, because there's I don't like prejudice very much between Jews at all, and I sort of like to sort of pick people up on it, but there's no one who says my boy in my family. There's not really an oy vey tradition, and even things like bagels weren't part of our tradition. They talk about yekkers. My family is not a yekker, even though they're Viennese, because they came from the Haim. And so there are so many different expressions of Judaism, even within the Ashkenazi world. I always remember David Bolkover saying, and he wrote another beautiful book of the time about Bela Gutmann, the football hero who won the European Cup as manager of Benfica and who won the Austrian Championship with my grandparents, actually, in Hakoah, Vienna in 1924. He said that we had lost our common memory. It didn't just account for the murder of 6 million Jews, but that it also destroyed the collective memory of exactly who we may have been. And this is why what you're telling me and what Chen tells me, what Lynn tells me, is absolutely vital as we all come together, actually. The truth is that there are as many Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews in my children's classroom now in London in the 21st century as there are Ashkenazim, and we're all coming together, whether we're from France, the UK, Argentina, wherever, Russia, wherever they are from. It's important.
I do hope so. I mean, the term Mizrahi was a term of pejorative term for so many years. When all the Jews from Arab lands went to the new state of Israel, they were regarded as foreigners. They were speaking Arabic. Yeah, they were speaking the language of the enemy. They had the music. They listened to the music of the enemy. They were forced to kind of cover up their Mizrachiness, as it were. And still to this day, they're still pretty much second-class citizens. It's not a level playing field by any means. But in the early days, definitely, it was very much they were the bottom of the pile, despite having as much education and as much right to be there. So it's an ongoing thing. But I'm glad to hear that, I mean, I hate the prejudice between Jews as well. I try and make light of it. I say, I've never eaten what's that stuff? The fish in jelly.
Gefilte fish.
I've never had gefilte fish in my life.
Stick a carrot on, close your eyes, get a fork, off you go.
Thank you.
I could eat gefilte fish, fried fish balls, and falafel, which look alarmingly similar, at the same table, no problem. At the same time. Carol, let's move on to the creative side of what you do and how you arrived at this concentration of storytelling for the Mizrahim, that you're a keyboard player, an accordionist in the pop and world music fields, recording and touring around the world with artists. We mentioned Ahmed Mutar of Iraq, and then also, nothing compares to you, Carol. It's Sinead O'Connor, the Indigo Girls, and you're a cartoonist. You're the Surreal McCoy, are you? The Spectator and the Private Eye. You're not the first cartoonist who's appeared on this series, by the way. Mr. Zoom Rockman is right up there as well. Good.
Great talent.
What a talent. He's only 21 now, isn't he? And, of course, you drew the Wolf of Baghdad graphic memoir based on your own family, and the fact that it comes from within you, it just adds a little bit of extra texture to the art.
Well, this was the first time I'd ever done anything long form. Previously, I've done single panel gags, the gag you see in papers and magazines. And to do a book, I thought, I don't know what made me do it. It just occurred to me. Maybe I thought it was the right time. I don't know. But as soon as I started, I thought, this is something I really want to do. And while I was drawing it, I was thinking, I wonder if there's a way that I can bring my musical professional life into this as well. And because I was drawing it digitally, as opposed to with pen and paper, it gave me more flexibility. I could turn it into a kind of an animation, something called a motion comic, actually, which is a mixture of of a book that you kind of look at on screen, where the panels come to life sort of one by one, and the story slowly unfolds itself. And because there was no dialogue, I thought, well, perhaps I could do a soundtrack to it. And so that was the idea of how the animation came to be. Well, I've always been since I left school, actually since before I left school, I was playing in bands at 16. Don't tell mum and dad. But I was always in a band of some sort.
Will they listen this far? This is the question.
Well, bless them. I was supposed to go to university to study music. I took a year off. I ended up on the road with a band, and that was it. I was in a pop band, and I never looked back since. So I've been a professional musician all my life, mostly doing session work for different people. Like Sinead, I was with Sinead in Sinead's band for about 10 years. Still with the Indigo Girls, who are a folk duo in America, folk rock duo. I've worked with all kinds of people. Whoever brings, you go and you job. It's a jobbing musician. About 12 years ago, I was one of the founder members of the London Klezmer Quartet. So I have delved in the world music field. I have looked at Jewish music and, became like playing klezmer. And then through klezmer, I got introduced to Ahmed through a mutual friend. And it just, I thought, I must look at this music. This is actually the music I should be playing, because it's my heritage. And so he gave me a great founding, a great kind of grounding of knowledge, because he's such a great oud player, and his knowledge is amazing, his wisdom. So I was in his band for a couple of years, and then I joined another band called Ayin, founded by Daniel Jonas, some of you whom you might know as the musician who founded Los Desterrados, who a very important Ladino band, a London-based musician. And he was looking to form a Judeo-Arabic band. And that was the band that we used to provide the Wolf of Baghdad soundtrack eventually.
Finally, Carol, what is the message amid the book and the multimedia, and what do we call it? A cartoon? What do we call it? Movie?
It's a book, it's a motion comic, and it's also a live event because we perform it. The band, like you imagine a silent movie, you have the animation running on screen, and then you have the band in the pit playing the music to go along with it. So it's like a live event. So it's a three-pronged attack, as it were. Yeah. So it's a book, an animation, and a live event.
Carol, there's another important dimension to The Wolf of Baghdad, a memoir of a lost homeland, and that is the donation and support from Dangoor Education.
Absolutely. They were instrumental at the beginning of the project when I was doing research and development for about 3 months. They gave me a grant to help me. And also I must thank Arts Council England for the grant they gave me too at the beginning. I couldn't have done it without them. And I just want to mention my wonderful Kickstarter patrons who funded the soundtrack. Thank you, guys.
The thing about Dangoor Education is, of course, they're also from the same background as you, aren't they?
In fact, my grandmother was a Dangoor.
Oh, really?
We are related.
Oh, right.
Family. Oh, yes. Everybody's related. Everyone's a cousin of everyone else. You know how it is. Families are huge. So, yeah, we are related. Although I didn't pull that card.
No, strictly on merit. Strictly on merit only, of course. I must look through my family tree. I might have to go back about 35 generations through the Adams side or the Eve side, but I'm sure we're related as well.
I'm pretty sure. We all came from Babylon. We all came from the same blooming place.
All the way from Gan Eden. And
Absolutely.
That definitely wasn't in Birmingham. It was probably more near where you're from, actually, because we crossed over the Euphrates.
Probably what, Camden? Definitely out there. I cannot wait to go back there. I really can't. I just can't. Just to see it, just to smell the air, to smell the same air that my ancestors did. That would be enough.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
What is your message to listeners, to viewers, to readers?
Gosh, that's a hard one. I just want to tell our family story. That's all. And I want them to hear it and make of it what they will. And all the disparate communities who come together through this, I am so grateful that we've been able to build bridges and start talking to each other through shared music, shared visuals. They recognize so much of what's on screen and what they hear. It doesn't matter if you don't understand the language in the songs, you kind of understand the emotion. I'm hoping that will come across in the visuals and the music itself. And you get the feeling of someone's love for their homeland.
Carol Isaacs, The Wolf of Baghdad, author, creator, thank you very much for joining me on Jonny Gould's Jewish State.
Thank you, Jonny. It's been a complete pleasure. Even though you support Aston Villa.
Well, who do you support?
Manchester United, of course.
Oh, right. Well, we came back the other day. We normally give away the 2-goal leads, but you did this time, so I'm grateful of that.
Jonny Gould's Jewish State is brought to you with Dangoor Education.